I'm Mona Arshi, and I'm a poet, and I'm poet in residence at Cly Sands in Norfolk. What I've been involved in is a project where I'm collaborating with digital partners and the venue partner, Cly. We all kind of try to produce something that is I suppose, an immersive installation stroke poetry space. We had a few challenges at the beginning of the project, and one of those was COVID. We were expecting to go to the venue early on in March, April, and of course that didn't happen. So we went. We didn't go till July. So that meant that I was having to really think about some of the kind of more kind of the underlying philosophy or the poetics around nature writing and what I would be going into, what I'd be writing. So I was doing a lot of research about birds and what was actually physically at Cly. The shift really came when we made the site visit in July, and at the time we didn't make it with the digital partners, and we Mutiny. And I suppose once we were there, it was really interesting because the venue itself, Cly, is such a beautiful, fragile landscape. It's beautifully curated. It's been looked after quite a lot. There's a lot of human intervention, which I didn't appreciate. Um, and at the same time, what was interesting for me was how much sound was really a sort of part of the character of the place. How much, for example, the Norfolk reeds were almost the chorus of the place, and then the birds flitting around, and how dynamic the place was, and how much that your ear was having to attend to everything else around you. And so I realised actually that what we could do would be something to do about attending to the sound at Cly. It felt like Cly was populated by all these characters, be it the reeds or the North Sea, or the birds, of course. Now, I I found this really, the discovery of birdsong, really interesting, because there's a lot of birds in my poetry, in my two books. I often use birds. They often symbolize the soul or love, and there's lots of sort of creatures and birds in my work generally anyway. But what I they sort of arrive as sort of unintended guests. But this is very different. This is looking at the birds sort of, not in the peripheral space. You're taking the birds and you're looking at them, and you're attending to their sound and their bird song. So I'm creating these poems, and they're going to be sound poems. And then I thought what would be really interesting is to then have a sort of poet response to those sound poems, and that is a poem that is more discernible as a poem, but which still retains some of the patterning in the original poem, which is a sound poem. I'm calling it a sound poem because, and I go between calling it a poem, a sound poem, and sometimes a song. And actually, I like the fact that I can't quite pin it down, because I think it is a kind of quite an ephemeral thing, and on the page they look quite lace-like. So there's something about that which replicates birdsong, and then there's a sort of a response to it. What I have discovered is that birdsong is incredibly complex, and it's it's actually something that you can learn quite a lot from. And when you want to try and translate the birdsong into something that resembles English, of course you can't, because there's no syntax or grammar. So one of the things I discovered about trying to listen to birdsong, and I'd slowed it down, and I've listened to it slow down 50%, and then slow down again, is to try to translate, when you're translating birdsong, you bring something else to bear when you are listening to the birdsong. You are listening in a very different way, and you're not listening for meaning, of course, you're listening for patterning. But what ends up happening is, because we are human beings with language, you end up sort of translating the music, the birdsong, into language. And what I discovered is that I was using quite a lot of my two languages. I was using English, and I was also using my mother tongue, Punjabi, which was quite a discovery, because it's a language that I never have used in poetry before. I've always wondered if it would be quite nice to use it, and I haven't used it. And I thought that language was, I was using that language when I was sort of translating it in a very natural, instinctive way. And what's interesting is that when we go to CLI, and with the digital team, once we capture some of the bird song, we're hoping to go along for the dawn chorus, and so get up really early in the morning, and capture that and capture the sounds of the sea. There might be a way of layering and adding texture to both poems, and that's really exciting, because I think that's where the poem will really become really alive, and that's where we'll see Cly, and hear Cly in those poems. The other thing that I thought was interesting about the project itself is that it's writer led, so it's different from a lot of projects that you might see, or digital installations you might see, which maybe privilege the digital. This is clearly a project where the poetry and the poetics take central stage, and I think it's quite interesting because it's something that I think hasn't been done before, using a poet and actually thinking about language of poetry that normally lands on the page and stays on the page, and actually taking that poetry and turning it into something else.